Hello viewer, and welcome back to the channel. The guy you see before you is a noob. We have called this guy Bryan. Bryan is a noob. Bryan not only doesn't know what he's doing on PUBG, but he also doesn't know what he's doing on a games console. I thought I'd bring you this footage as we've all met a Bryan, and I thought I'd like to share with you how PUBG treated him. The tale of Bryan the Noob starts on the map of Karakin, a map we had played many times before. Little did we know though that in the middle of Karakin is this house. The house of Bryan. As we entered Bryan's house, we saw him staring at a gun for what felt like 2 to 3 minutes. Once Bryan picked up the gun, he decided to not put any ammo into it, and demonstrated this by clicking the trigger at us repeatedly. We wondered who Bryan was. Was Bryan a small child in a man's body, or a drug addict who couldn't concentrate on what he was doing? We felt for Bryan and wondered if he was a friendly chap. But alas, our hopes were soon answered as Bryan decided to punch us in the face. Bryan then proceeded to run around his living room sofa, throwing punches at us from 6 to 10 feet away. He then proceeded outside despite not being armed or having any armor. Curious as what Bryan would use as his tactics from here, we gave pursuit and was surprised when he decided to just lay down in the open. Trying to get in the mindset of Bryan, we continued to pursue him, acting in his manner, trying to get into the mindset of Bryan, the noob. We laid here, defenseless, for what felt like eternity. I was growing worried. We were concerned for Bryan's mental capabilities. Suddenly he'd gone AFK. We assumed to become more intoxicated on whatever he was on. Concerned he may never come back, we were relieved when we saw some movement, as again he lay down. Looking back in his house for something that could perhaps bring him round or help him out, we saw Bryan crawling towards his own front door. Things were getting from bad to much worse. Bryan had forgotten how to open doors. Knowing how dire the situation was getting, we decided we had to defend him from players. And at this moment, an enemy player approached. Bryan seemed oblivious to the fact that I had just saved his life and had proceeded to his shed to look at his favourite crowbar. It appeared at this point that we had befriended Bryan the Noob. He took us around the houses and showed us different objects that were available for picking up. Alas, Bryan decided to pick none of these objects up for himself. So selfless was Bryan the Noob. Having become friends, we decided to help Bryan the Noob out. As he ran over to his neighbour's house, he reached another door. This time, we thought we'd help him out by opening it for him and letting him in. We hoped this generosity would lift Bryan's spirits and give him some hope. we saw him approaching another gun and some ammo. He had picked up the gun. We were really making progress. Bryan may not be a noob forever. Our hopes were further raised as Bryan suddenly decided to pick up the ammo. But alas, he hadn't realized he could put this in his guns. The progress continued as Bryan moved towards the kitchen, and he'd suddenly learnt he could open doors himself. We really were on a roll. As we entered the kitchen, we noticed some armor on the floor. Perhaps Bryan could put a hat on and even defend himself as we had defended him from the enemies of the map. Alas, this is not a happy tale. Although we had defended Bryan from the enemies of Karakin, we couldn't defend him from one final thing. We couldn't defend him from the gods of PUBG. Bryan died. Bryan was dead. Before he could learn how to play the game, he had been killed by PUBG. We will forever remember Bryan the noob and what PUBG had done to him.
Choo 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 choo. It's Chewy Cracker. Choo 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 choo.